The following is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for younger viewers. This video contains strong language, crude humor, and suggestive themes. Viewer discretion is advised. If I may make a bold statement, the Sea and City era is where Cartoon Network peaked. The bumpers were so full of life, it felt like the whole world was connected. Cartoon Fridays were still running and airing new episodes of Ed, Edd and Eddy, Billy and Mandy, Kids Next Door, a lot of Cartoon Network's best. After the City era left us, things got weird. Cartoon Network started looking more like a meme, then Sea and Real happened, and yeah, the shows all stayed pretty good. We miss you, Sea and City. Those of us who remember you hold you tightly in our hearts. What childlike wonder we'd hold with dreams of living in this sprawling metropolis full of such life, exciting events, and always the interesting characters around every corner. Someone really needs to get a team together and rebuild this city in VR chat or something. I think I'd practically start living there. Probably somewhere in or near Ed, Edd and Eddy's cul-de-sac. They do Halloween good there. They also do Halloween good at Foster's, it seems. Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends was a show by the animation powerhouse Craig McCracken, which is also probably the most badass name you could have. Craig McCracken. That's like the name of some kind of King Viking Serpent Slayer, which is also the name of my black metal band. I don't know what this tangent was.
You're frightening Miss Chambers!
Foster's basically follows the story of a kid named Mac, who has to give up his imaginary friend, Blue, so he sends him to an establishment that takes in imaginary friends whose kids have outgrown them, have become unable to care for them, or have become too problematic to be put up for adoption, or generally just taken care of, on the grounds that Blue won't be up for adoption as long as Mac is consistently visiting him. Despite Mac being technically the main character, Blue is the one most focused on, and he's the worst character in the main cast. While I remember loving this show and did enjoy this short revisit, Blue is abjectly terrible. He's a loudmouth, selfish brat who always has to have his way and has to have all the attention on him and constantly causes trouble for himself and everyone else just for the hell of it. He can be funny and entertaining to watch when he's not being unbearable or just flat out offensive.
Please. It'll be easier if she hears it in her native tongue. You're not going to Europe!
But I guess it makes sense. Blue is supposed to be a kid after all. Kids don't know when they're doing something that is absolutely not socially acceptable, or just going flat out way too far sometimes. And it's weird, because for the most part, Max seems to be Blue's polar opposite. He's polite, he's patient, he's selfless. He thinks about his actions and the consequences thereof beforehand. He plans ahead, he uses logic and reasoning to solve his problems. I could totally go on this train of thought that Blue represents Mac without his moral code or his expectations of maturity from his peers. The ability to be self-centered, impulsive, and immature literally cast from his mind and taken on a life of its own. But picking apart something like that would take more research than the 5 or 6 episodes I rewatched for this, and I'm not making a theory video here. There's not much continuity. The series is episodic and each episode is its own self-contained story. It's whimsical while fairly down to earth, and has a lot of creative ideas to work with the universe they have established, like when Blue unleashes a swarm of base thoughts called Scribbles. Mac wants them to be treated like the rest of the imaginary friends at Foster's. Blue introduces the idea that they can each be assigned a single task and can be useful, and the rest of the house becomes lazy as everything starts being done for them. Along with Mac and Blue are their friends Wilt, the 10-foot-tall polite one who's always apologizing for everything and nothing, Eduardo, whose shtick is that he's this big, scary-looking monster of an imaginary friend, but he's a cowardly softie with a love of plushies, and Coco. I don't know what's going on here, but she's my favorite. I think the creators literally said, let's make her the weird one in both design and personality, and she absolutely worked. She's this and she also lays prize eggs with typically random things inside them. I recall a portion of her humor just being all the nonsensical stuff that would come out of her eggs. There's also the elderly yet young at heart founder Madame Foster and her granddaughter Frankie, and imaginary friend Mr. Harriman. Frankie works as the custodian and caregiver at Foster's, while Harriman is the overseer and head of the house. As a kid, I always thought Harriman was no fun, just a stuffy curmudgeon, but in the episodes I rewatched for this video, I found myself mostly agreeing with him, especially because, in regards to Blue actively going against his every rule, just being a general thorn in his side and the bane of civil order. Harriman's rules are in place to keep the house from turning into a den of chaos.
I dislike you with great intensity.
Sometimes Blue's mischief ultimately leads to some kind of positive outcome, but to no fault of Blue. He's just there to cause a mess for someone else to clean up and find some cracks in the system that need filling or some kind of resolution that needs to be reached. Of course, there are the not-too-often reoccurring background characters and antagonists, like Mac's older brother Terrence, Duchess, an uptight asshole who's always trying to ruin everyone else's fun, the living Hot Topic meme that is cheese, and the adorable stroopwafel that is Eurotrish, who was only ever in 2 episodes, Craig!
My wife, Lauren.
For the most part, continuity wasn't really a concern. You could practically go in any order and enjoy it all the same. Though it does benefit you to watch it in order, just so you can point out the background characters that cameo, understand a subtle in-joke or two, or go into one of the Halloween episodes, Nightmare on Wilson Way, with the understanding that Mac doesn't take too well to sugar because of context from the episode Partying is Such Sweet Soiree. Speaking of which, I'll talk about Nightmare on Wilson Way after I talk about the episode titled See, it's a spooky song. You know, I feel like there's a pattern. Chowder's Halloween episode called Poltergeist was a parody of classic horror films, working with a lot of the tropes of those films to create comedy from horror. In Meat Man, from Camp Lazlo, they used those tropes rather to tell a scary story through the lens of a comedy-focused cartoon. I feel like, at least, that yes, I'm going to do that every time I mention the title,
which is only twice in this video, the dumper
is the inverse. This episode is telling a funny story, but shown through the lens of a horror show. The colors are dull and dark, it's night, and during a thunderstorm, it's, well, I know I use the term charming a lot when I talk about Halloween, but that's a lot of what I like about Halloween. There's a charm to it that can't be replaced. The episode opens with Mac and Blue playing in the rain and mud puddles, and of course getting sick because rain in cartoons is contagious. You'll get the rain flu. Frankie drives Mac home and on the way back gets caught up in some spooky happenings involving a hulking figure with a hook for a hand. Meanwhile, back at Foster's, Wilt, Ed, and Coco are watching one of those schlocky 50s horror flicks.
The curse of the cannibal ghost of the haunted house on Horror Hill.
And I could analyze just this joke movie to hell and back. Like, movies of that era are so hard to take seriously, for me at least. The effects are so low quality, the acting is so cheesy, it's just, there will never be a replacement. The only thing that compares nowadays is the occasional good-bad movie that graces us with its schlock. To my knowledge, horror then was like action now. It was a popcorn flick that you take Susie May from down the block with your nickels you get from your paper route down to the drive-in. She gets all close because she's easily spooked. You know, that kind of thing. But ironically, I think what killed horror as a popcorn flick was literally the serial killer boom. Aliens, giant bugs, ghosts, and vampires were out. And in comes the never-ending wave of unkillable psychopaths with sharp implements. And then the gore flicks. Oh god, the fucking gore flicks. They never end, and I die a little inside every time I hear about a new Saw film. Hopefully that horrible cycle is ended by now. Hopefully.
He'll scare you to death. Then eat your ghost!
While the others are getting themselves spooked by the nightmarish acting, Blue's illness progressively worsens. He loses all his colors, starts moaning and hallucinating, and the snot. This wasn't a thing I ever enjoyed about Cartoon Network. Why the obsession with mucus? I mean, I get that in the context of this episode, it's to make the others think that Blue's a ghost, which does lead to hilarious hijinks. I just had to say it. Kids Next Door has the same issue. The three try to give Blue the Ghostbusters treatment.
Who are you gonna call? They've been out of business for years.
Like, literally, pop culture osmosis, you know what she's saying. And it all comes to a head when Frankie, panicked by not being able to get in because the doors were barricaded, and the mysterious figure is right behind her, runs the bus through the front entrance.
Monster! Monster! Monster!
For the sake of this being a kid's show, I really hope she's saying monster, but I swear I hear an L in there.
Oh no, Mr. Thick!
Turns out that the figure was just a friend looking to get into Foster's, but Blue ends up scaring them as well, and the episode just kinda ends. The same goes for most Foster's episodes, it seems. At least, that's how it was for the episodes that I rewatched. They just kinda ended at some point. I guess that's just how it goes, the jokes are done being told and the story is practically finished, so just end the episode, right? I don't know, it always feels a bit jarring when it's just like, hey, punchline, roll credits. You know? The episode had a lot of pretty solid comedy. The physical comedy was well timed and paced out. And of course I love a good parody horror flick. I can't deny that purposefully bad voice acting always gives me a chuckle.
What a perfect night for a drive.
I almost overlooked the pretty clever dichotomy initially. The 50s horror movie parody pairing well with what's happening to Frankie, which plays out like an 80s slasher flick. I think this episode's a good example of the interesting evolution of the horror film industry, and how differently the consumers react to it. Not just throughout the years, but in the current age, either looking back or experiencing the horror firsthand. Horror will always exist, whatever the medium, and we will always be there to consume it as it evolves with the times. The next episode I want to look at, Nightmare on Wilson Way, was premiered in 3D, funnily enough. Like, I remember that weird event. There were like 5 or something new Halloween specials debuted, and they were all premiered in 3D. And they just expected you to have a pair of 3D glasses lying around. So the episode opens with Mac's execution. All of Foster's is ready to go out for trick-or-treating, and Mac isn't the only person Blue outright murders tonight, as Mr. Harriman has a heart attack and dies because of Blue's snake-in-a-can trick, then subsequently comes back as a zombie. Look, zombies are overdone, we all know this, and yet The Last of Us 2 came out anyway, during a pandemic. Social awareness? What's that?
From hell's heart, I stab at thee, for hate's sake.
But this episode genuinely makes zombies fun, because they have some limited vocabulary, and rather than the typical ridiculous strength and gore-festness that zombies usually have to offer, these zombies' goals seem to just be to create more zombies. They're slow, lumbering, and frail, but one bite will turn you in an instant. One by one, each of Blue's friends are taken and zombified, and as soon as the others are back from trick-or-treating, the entire house ends up as a horde of the living dead. By the end, Blue's only option is to create an even worse monster, Frankenmac! Powered by evil! Okay, I can't keep this joke up anymore. I'm sorry. Mac was tied up to prevent him from getting any candy so he wouldn't go into a sugar-crazed frenzy, and the zombies weren't actually zombies. The entire house got together to play one big prank on Blue, to be the ones who pulled the big trick on Halloween, because they were all pretty fed up with Blue's snake-in-a-can trick, which caused a lot of problems the previous Halloween. So yeah, no zombies. Despite that, I feel like Zombies for the Sake of Humor is vastly underdone. Even when they're making a zombie comedy film, the zombies are still an active threat. I'd love to see someone run with the idea that zombies are kind of a joke. Maybe even that they can be cured, but like they're powered by evil or something, so they don't want to be, and it's just like, no, we will conquer the world, puny creatures. I want a movie like that! If you can make zombies entertaining, you got my props. And this episode definitely did make an entertaining zombie-themed Halloween special. This was just fun, mostly down-to-earth Halloween-y comedy, and I always love that. There were so many references too many to count really. More than just the Halloween episodes, I'm glad I had this brief revisit to this series. It's all so charming, and these Halloween specials were just oozing with it. The humor absolutely holds up after all these years. It's got a good understanding of horror tropes, as well as the understanding of how to tactfully deconstruct them. What else can I say? I've never been good at discussing comedy, so I think I'll move on for now. This video may prove to be longer than I had intended it to be, and I need to keep this spooky train on its tracks.